Hi, everybody, and welcome back to On the Roof. Today we have one of the most esteemed guests I've ever had on this show. Somebody I've been really looking forward to getting on someday, and today is that day. I'd like to welcome writer, journalist, columnist, novelist, Denis Hamill. Welcome, Denis.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Scott.
Well, we have a mutual friend who I often refer to as the quintessential New Yorker, Colin Quinn.
Yeah, we come from the same neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Right, but I have to say, as far as New Yorkers go, you might trump. Let me choose a different word. You might top him. I think every New Yorker
in age for sure. But go ahead.
Every New Yorker is unique to themselves, and that's a big part of being a true New Yorker, right? But the way you tell your stories has been, I don't know the words. I'm not a wordsmith like you are, but what I always appreciated about the way you write is you're so raw and so eloquent in being raw. And I just think that's such an art, and it's such a rare talent that you can be so raw yet so eloquent at the same time.
Well, it probably comes from growing up in Brooklyn and being in a family with of 7 kids, so you had to speak loud to get extra mashed potatoes. But when I was teaching my journalism students at Brooklyn College, the whole beginning of a writer's career is finding a voice, and you find that you've always had it. You emulate other people, you imitate, then you emulate, and then you try to top that. And when whatever you've been influenced by, and when you find your own voice, settle in and be comfortable with it, and trust your first instincts. So while I'm a well-read guy, I've read a lot. My mother encouraged reading. My older brother Pete was a writer, so he encouraged reading for all of us. That's all we ever got from him for every birthday and Christmas was books. My mom got us books from the public library because we didn't have any dough, so we got a library card at age 5, as soon as you were in the first grade, and that was on 9th Street and 6th Avenue in Brooklyn. And then half a block down, she was a cashier at the RKO Prospect. And I guess 4 of her kids have published books and written and worked in the movies. So it was not kind of no accident. My mom influenced us in a big way. Pete used to say that my mom taught us that the way out of poverty was through the Brooklyn Public Library. And I think that was true. And the movie house helped us get to kind of Hollywood. I've done a lot of screenwriting, and I've written a bunch of novels, and I've written newspaper columns for in 3 different cities for 40 years. So the early influences, but finding your voice and feeling comfortable within that voice is always the easiest part of writing. Once you find it, you can address any issue because you've got to trust your instincts.
But also the way that you expressed whatever you were particularly writing about in the columns in particular I'm referring to was a way that everyone related with. Like you didn't just speak for you spoke for a whole city.
Yeah, well, because I always Breslin had the best line. He said he wrote for people who moved their lips when they read. But but bring it down to the most basic. Like Elmore Leonard said, when you're writing a book, when you're doing the rewrite, get rid of all the stuff that sounds like writing. and tell the story. Just tell the story. And there are times to try to be elegant in the writing, and this, but always just make it sound like a letter to a friend. I always encourage people to do that. If you're writing to someone that you trust, and you're going to unload your true feelings rather than a formal business letter, write everything you're doing like a letter to a friend. And really what it is a letter to yourself. Great. And then you'll find your real voice, because your friend will know if you're full of shit. You know what I mean? Your friend. Yeah. So if you sound pompous or overly florid, then your friend is going to say, what'd you write this with? Well, shade. I mean, but so you need to find your own voice, and then really rely heavily on the stuff in the toolkit. I come from a blue collar, working class background. My old man was in the local 3 of the electricians union. He was a factory worker, but they unionized that factory, and he got union bennies. So, but he loved his toolbox, and in a writer's toolbox, there are nouns, there are verbs, there are adverbs, and what you have to do is get rid of the adverbs and tell stories with nouns and verbs. Bing, bang, bang. My brother Pete taught a whole generation of newspaper writers that he influenced a lot of them, because he was, he was so well liked in the business, and he was a good editor. He was an editor at the Post and the News. Always try to end a sentence on a hard noun. Use an active verb, not a lazy verb. Don't say that he walked slowly into the room. Get rid of the adverb and walk and say he charged into the room. And then it electrifies the writing. So if you
Jesus,
that's almost cinematic. So it works as a screenwriter. If you listen to sports broadcasters, they say things like, he dribbled that one down third. He blasted that into the seats. You get a sense, or if you listen to it on radio, it brings you into the scene in your own mind. You can visualize the ballpark and see how hard the ball is hit. So if you use the right tools in the kit, and then you're honest about who you are by sending in this letter to your friend, then you're going to write really strong sentences that express your true feelings.
Let me ask you a question, because, I grew up in Queens. I'm one of 7 too, Irish Catholic, similar, but when you have a brother like Pete fucking Hamill, I mean, come on.
But to us, he was just.
No. I get that. To you, it's just your experience. I get all of that.
Right.
There's nobody that's ever put an I to a word that doesn't know how prolific he was, at what he did. Right. So when you have somebody like that to kind of, would you call in a way, when you started, like, when you were just beginning to get dig your teeth into this career, almost like an apprentice?
Oh, absolutely. I learned how to write from when I was a kid. In the early days, I used to go to stores for Pete. I used to do errands for him, take his dry cleaning, all that stuff when I was a kid. And he would pay us for it, because, Pete had a job at a newspaper, and then he started to write books and stuff like that. But then, before the internet, he would travel a lot. He was always off, and on assignment in different places. And there was no fax machines, and there was no internet. So he used to call me up. I lived in his house in Prospect Park West when we finally bought that house. And part of my job was to sit at a typewriter as he dictated his column to me. And I would have to hunt and pack.
Holy mackerel! I mean, damn.
So I understood how the columns were constructed, and then where to put periods, paragraphs, new paragraph, and the strong sense. And I would have to make him spell out certain words because it was over the phone. Until I learned how to do it, and then a copy boy from the New York Post would come and pick it up after I typed it, and then bring it to the paper, and then and then in the morning it would be in the newspaper, and it was like a magical experience to me. And then there were times when I would go out with him when he was covering something, and I would be with him and watch him ask the questions and take the notes, and he would take stock of what the weather was, how the person was dressed, the details that bring a you are there sensibility to the story, so that Pete didn't just give you his opinion. He went out and he earned his opinion by doing the reporting, by speaking to common people or the people involved in the murder, in the anti-war protest, in the political rally. Talk to the people that were there on the ground. And then out of that experience of doing the reporting in the freezing cold, in the sweltering heat, whatever it was, then he would go and write the column and earn his opinion. And then I followed obviously in those footsteps. When people say, was your big brother? Yes, my big brother influenced me a lot. If he had been a fire captain, I probably would have been a fireman. You know, I mean, he was
probably
like,
be the chief.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? He influenced. He was my big brother, and I loved him, and so I emulated him. But no one gave me newspaper column for 40 years because I was Pete Hamill's brother. You had to go out and break your balls and earn it on your own. So it was a blessing. In some ways, I couldn't get a job in a daily newspaper when I was starting out in New York because I was Pete Hamill's kid brother, and he was already writing with Breslin. It was a tough market to crack. I got a job at The Voice, but then I went to LA, and then I went to Boston and got columns in those towns where they didn't know me or know him that well. They knew Pete, somewhat on the national scene, but he was a New York icon.
I used to come home with the Village Voice, and my father would throw me out of the fucking house.
That's right. The Village Voice was. But I tell you what, it was a great laboratory for so many writers in New York. I mean, it was.
Yes.
And every time Pete got fired, he always went to the Village Voice in between jobs. Yeah, he always went to the Village Voice because it was the old reliable. And when I was starting out, when I won my first big journalism award at the Village Voice, which then helped me get a job at New York Magazine, and then at the LA Herald Examiner, and then the Boston Herald, and then I had enough daily newspaper experience to get hired in New York, first for Newsday and then for the New York Daily News.
When you were talking about this time period working for your brother like that, it sounds to me like that's probably a better and more beneficial experience than actually going to like the greatest journalism university.
I never took a journalism course. I've taught it. I've taught journalism.
Yeah.
But I tried to, and I tell the students that I never took one, that the best experience you're going to get is going out and cover stories. So I would tell them, I would play movies for them, like All the President's Men and different. I would regale them with stories about me and Breslin, Pete, and Murray Kempton, and different people, Jack Newfield, that did this business, but worked in this business, and about stories that I covered. But mostly, I made them go out and cover stories, and even getting it wrong teaches you how to get it right. So I tell them what's missing in the story, and it was a lot of fun doing that. But you're not going to learn how to be a reporter in a classroom. Just
right.
No,
right. Would you say that you and guys like Michael Daly, another brilliant writer, were like the next generation, like the torch was kind of handed to you guys? Because you kind of picked up where Jimmy Breslin and your brother left off.
Michael Daly, his actual godfather was Jimmy Breslin. So we both started at a newspaper. My brother John started at a newspaper first in Brooklyn, called a little weekly called Flatbush Life, which some smart-ass reader, wise-ass, said to me there was a contradiction in terms. But anyway, but we went to that newspaper, and they gave me a column, which I called Under the Boardwalk, which I could write anything I wanted, but I had to cover stories, crime, politics, covering elections for councilman seats, for assemblies and state assembly and state senate and mayor, and different community board and PTA meetings, and all the kind of local stuff where all politics is local. And it was from that experience where there was an editor named Bernie Edelman, who was terrific, great guy, Vietnam veteran. My brother John met at an anti-war. John was a veteran of Vietnam War veteran, and so was Bernie Edelman. So John worked there first. He got me and Michael jobs there, and we went from there both went to the Village Voice. It got us the clips to get us full-time jobs at the Village Voice. And that's how we started our careers. I mean, you had to start from the beginning.
Yeah, I delivered the Daily News from 72 till 78. And I remember when your brother came on. I think he came on the same day as Lupica. And I was like, I was into Bill Gallo and Dick Young. Like, I would read those two guys. Just being a young kid and a sports freak, like Dick Young,
yeah.
Dick Young
was a great sports columnist. Yeah.
He was. I don't know if I ever forgive him for getting rid of Tom Seaver, but anyway,
no, me neither.
Yeah,
and he was conflicted because his son-in-law worked in. He had some kind of conflict of interest in that story involving his son.
You know, there's a thing though. Like back in those days, a writer, a good example is Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams. Is like how you were with the writers, how much control writers had over your, persona as an athlete. Yeah. Like if you worked the writers the way DiMaggio did, and you called them fuck ups the way Ted Williams did, it played a lot into how you were perceived by a nation of people.
Tom Seaver told me years later that one of the reasons he left New York was because of Dick Young. I mean, it tormented him. And he said when they started going after their wives, saying that his wife was jealous of Tommy John's wife or whatever. He said, well, I knew it was time to just pack my bags and get the fuck out of Dodge. I'm not gonna have my wife subjected.
And this is Tom Seaver.
Huh?
This is Tom Seaver.
Oh, the best. You know what's amazing? I mean, Tom Seaver was an icon for growing up. My dad was became an American rooting for the Dodgers, for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yeah.
And then when we were little kids, we thought that there was this evil force in the world called that son of a bitch O'Malley. We thought there was a guy named Son of a Bitch O'Malley. That's what we thought his name was, because he would rant and rave about that sentiment. Because for my old man from Ireland, that it was an Irishman, a Quisling as he called him, who took his bums west. So he was really depressed for those years between 57 and 62. And when the Mets came into town, boy, he was so happy again that there was a National League team. And then Tom Seaver, after several miserable years, I guess it was, Tom Seaver pitched us to a World Series, and we were all huge Tom Seaver fans. And for a variety of reasons. He was a great pitcher, but he was the first guy with a college education, and he supported the anti-war protesters in New York, and that was a big thing in our family. But my brother John and I, who were as close as could be because we were Irish twins, 14 months apart, turned out that my brother John died of COVID the same day that Tom Seaver died. Yeah. So it was like amazing for me that there were two new stars in New York for me.
I didn't know, like, if you don't mind, are you comfortable talking about that? Your brother?
Sure.
That thing that you put, the Veterans Day letter to our, what do you want to call him?
The asshole, I call him.
The commander-in-chief. Yeah. As a commander-in-chief, I think we would be better with Commander Cody. But, whatever.
There you go.
But that letter, it was so scathing and, again, eloquent. It was just like, I mean, that blew me away. I just, and I'm not saying this just to like.
Yeah, it was Veterans Day. Every Veterans Day, I used to write my brother John a text or an email thanking him for his service and thanking him more than anything for coming home. That he came home in one piece. John was the gentlest of all the brothers, the best read, the most historical, immersed guy in the family. And he was completely anti-war during the Vietnam War. People used to call him a pussy and a coward for not wanting to go in the service. So he went and joined to prove them wrong, and then went whole hog and became an airborne ranger, the 173rd Airborne. But he kept to his kept to his morals, where he said, I'm not going over there to kill people. I'm going to save American GIs. And so he became a medic. And in the 173rd Airborne, they saw the most ferocious battles of the Vietnam War in 1968 during the Tet Offensive in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. And, you know, he survived 2 helicopter crashes, was wounded 3 times, got a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, and saved a lot of guys. Held their hands while they died. Gave them the rosary beads that my mom gave to him to take with him. And, you know, gave them water and morphine and promised to mail their half-written letters home to their girlfriends and their moms. And when he came home, he marched with the Vietnam veterans against the war to Washington, took his medals and threw them at the Pentagon with all the other guys. They all threw their medals and said, we don't want your fucking medals. We want the war to end. We don't want any more of us to die. We don't want any more Vietnamese to die. So he stuck to his morals and his principles. And then he never, he never boasted about it, but I was just so proud of him that he did that every year. That every year I would send him a note, you know, thanking him for having the balls to go and the heart to come home. And then this Veterans Day, I didn't have him anymore because he survived all that, but he died from Trump's virus, what I call the Trump virus. He died of that in California, where he bought a home on a GI loan after years of working for FEMA in different places. And I didn't have anybody to send that note to, so I wrote an open letter to Donald Trump, who dodged the draft 5 times with 5 different deferments, and spent his time grabbing women by their pussies in the nightclubs in New York, while my brother was holding the hands of dying teenagers in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, and I sent it to him. And it was his virus that wound up killing to me, it was Trump's virus. He did nothing about this virus. So,
listen, I agree with you.
And he killed my brother, and I hold Donald Trump responsible for my brother's death. I do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to give him any more this time than I have with you, but I agreed, and that resonated so much with me because, like, I think one of the great qualities of real New Yorkers, to me, just as my opinion, is that you speak for the underdog. The reverence you have for your brother John is the same, at least equivalent to what you have for your brother Pete. These are people. These are your brothers. I mean,
my brothers.
But for different reasons.
And we lost. I lost the 2 of them in a month.
Yeah.
Pete died on August 5th, and John died on September 1st.
But as a society, we would take somebody who, with the accomplishments of your brother Pete, and put him on this pedestal, and rightfully so, well deserved, clearly. But we forget about somebody like John, who just did, who had an integrity and an eternal fortitude that you recognize and honor, and that's why I thought what you wrote was so brilliant.
Thank you. And John worked at the Daily News before Peter or I did. I mean, you know, he was, when he came home from Vietnam, he went to work for the Daily News. And then later for Village Voice and the Rolling Stone, for LA Herald, Boston Herald. You know, John was an accomplished journalist too. And a screenwriter. We wrote a couple of Hollywood movies together, one for Richard Pryor. I mean, so, you know, we did everything together. We were partners, we were buddies, we were best friends, and it breaks my heart that he's gone. At least 2-3 times a week, I reach for my phone to text him. Still, that's still that. Man. And now the holidays only make it more italicized, you know. But anyway, I'm learning to be at peace with him. John's funeral was last week in California on Friday. It was the 52nd anniversary of him coming home from Vietnam, and so they had a 21-gun salute and played taps and buried him in a military cemetery in California. And that was tough to watch, but you know, there we go. It was a Zoom funeral, believe it or not.
Yeah,
it says it all about our time.
I know. I went to a wake just a couple of nights ago for another Irish kid who I partied my ass off with for the high school years and whatever. And it was just such a surreal experience. I mean, this was a wake in person, but it was so like, you couldn't hug nobody, you couldn't,
No.
and it was just so tragic on so many levels. And this wasn't COVID related, but you wonder sometimes about people's hospital care, how much that's already compromised due to what's going on with COVID. So this is affecting everybody in some kind of way.
Vaccines can't come soon enough, especially for old dudes like me, but there you go.
Yeah. So what do you got going on now? I mean, I know you're writing for Law and Order now. I mean,
yeah,
right?
That's really been my full-time gig for the last 2 years. I worked at the Daily News until 2015 when the ass just fell out of newspapers. They couldn't afford anybody making a certain amount of money anymore, and I couldn't afford to work for, they didn't, it was just a whole bunch of us just got let go. They're putting out the paper with a very small staff now, and they don't have the money to pay columnists. And
isn't that whole career going to have to be redefined in a sense? I mean, like I speak to musicians, especially ones that are coming up, and like it's not, the format is different. You don't come up, get signed by a record label, and
no,
it's a whole. You got to figure it all out on your own.
It's
and as a writer,
it's a whole new world. And I say that to my journalism students at Brooklyn College. I taught journalism and screenwriting at Brooklyn College, one at the Graduate Center for the Film School. But for the journalism students, I would tell them that, there's always going to be professionalized news, even on the internet. Like the New York Times has a bigger staff and a bigger circulation than it ever had now. And the Washington Post, the ones that where they have an audience base that can afford to pay for a paywall, you have to buy subscriptions to read it. Some of those newspapers are doing phenomenal work. I mean, they're doing really well. They're way in the black. So there still is places to work. And then there are all kinds of new websites. They pay shit. But when I started out, I got paid shit too. Flatbush Life paid $100 a week. And you had to, you were working 5 days a week. So you were making $20 a day, which would, I'm going back a while, I admit that.
Probably made that with delivering newspapers in 72.
But it was, it was just about minimum wage. But you got bylines. So when you start out, I tell them work for these small websites like the Brooklyner and different Gothamist or wherever, anywhere you can get published on a freelance basis, the Daily Beast or any of these places, BuzzFeed, as long as you have clips, then if you're good enough and you work your ass off, where you got to really work your balls off to pop out of the pack. And you have to learn how to be a good writer in addition to being a good reporter. And you have to be hungry. And that's what editors notice, the person that volunteers to go somewhere at 3 a.m, that, and without complaint, and for shit money. That's what you do when you're young in almost any profession. You work in the mailroom in Hollywood until somebody notices you, it's the same on Wall Street. You're a runner until you get, and then somebody teaches you how to do this and you take a Series 7 test, but it's all an apprenticeship, for me, it was hunt and peck, taking dictation from my brother. I happened to, have a home apprenticeship. I was blessed. I have to admit that. But whatever you have to do, you will find, if you have talent, it will find its way into the mainstream. People will find you and publish you if you're good, if you work hard at it.
When you're learning from your brother, who's not, it's not just that he's the best. Like it's not, what I mean? Like, so it's like if you're growing up and you want to play basketball and your father's fucking Red Holtzman, you got a good shot. If that's what, if it's something that you long to do, you got a good shot, right?
Yeah, sure.
So, but if you don't put in the 10,000 hours,
that's exactly right. The 10,000
you ain't going nowhere. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't. Like Michael Douglas had a father named Kirk Douglas, but Michael Douglas would never
is on his own. Yes.
If he didn't break his balls and take jobs like the streets of San Francisco,
Listen, it's harder for you and guys like you that have the name association more than it is easier.
Well, because you get compared to them. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you got shoes you have to fill, and it's just like everybody's looking
That's
at
the
you,
other
and they're
thing. You
already
don't want to
sizing you
have to
up.
be compared to Pete Hamill.
But you have no choice.
No, I don't have a choice. But so that's why it was good to go out of town. You know, and that's what a comic does too. I mean, you play in little clubs all across the country until you know you're ready for New York, and the same with actors. You know, they put in their time and off Broadway, school basements, and until somebody notices, and then you know,
right.
And you will pop out of the pack. I mean, Colin Quinn and I grew up in the same streets. I'm a little older than Colin, but you know, you come out of a working class neighborhood like that, but Colin worked his ass off. That's
no doubt, he still does every day.
Still does.
Hard as can be. Yeah.
He had natural talent, but to him it was. He said, you know, I've done a bunch of columns on him. It was like telling stories sitting on the stoop. I mean, you know, you're sitting on the Brooklyn. That's your first stage is the fucking stoop. And so everything he ever did was a return to the stoop. It was always him. How do I make my friends laugh? And so if he thinks he can make his friends laugh, like I said, writing the letter to your friend, it's the same shit. If you think because there's no tougher audience than the guys on the fucking stoop, I can tell you,
no,
right?
that's right.
Because they'll tell you when you're cornball,
especially if you went away for a while and come back to the stoop.
Yeah. And then who do you think you are? That you're gonna get a lot of. You forget where you come from. That's the other thing. Don't forget where you come from. My brother Pete, you know, traveled the world, lived in cities all over the world, in Spain, in Ireland, in England, in Italy, in Mexico. But when he was getting older and he knew that the time was coming, he bought himself a plot in Greenwood and then moved a mile from where we grew up. You know, Pete grew up, you know, was living on Prospect Place near Flatbush Avenue in about 3/4 of a mile from the tenement where we grew up when he died. And now he's in Greenwood, you know, so he wanted to go back to Brooklyn where he came from. You know, he'd only been living across the river in Manhattan, but he wanted to die in Brooklyn.
It's a big difference. Yeah,
he never forgot where he came from.
Especially the Brooklyn you're from. I mean, the neighborhood I'm from is not the neighborhood anymore. It's not even a resemblance of it.
What neighborhood in Queens are you from?
Maspeth.
Okay.
You know, it's a shell of what it was. You know, but you know, that's times change.
Oh yeah, the city evolves. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question.
The Park Slope I grew up in is not there anymore. It's a whole different.
Listen, there's a Southern rock group called the Outlaws. All right. So I was into that when, you know, coming up. So I find out they're playing in some like bar in Bushwick, and I'm just trying to draw this correlation: the Outlaws, Bushwick. It just adding up. But I go to a friend of mine who grew up in Ridgewood. Hey, you want to go? Yeah, we go. We went there. There were literally 8 people at this show. 8 people. They even came out. This was only 5 years ago or something like that. They even said, we've never done a gig like this ever. That's not, you talk about the early days. They didn't even have 5 people at the early days. There was more than that, right? So it was just one of those nights. But I was sitting in the car waiting for you know, at 7 o'clock, you're good to go. You can get out of the car and walk away. But I had, you know, down in Bushwick to find a spot, you know, so I sat in the car and I watched some white kid come walking up the block with an iPhone in his hand and headphones on. And I'm thinking like, wow, how much time has changed. There's no way a white kid's walking up this block back in the day with a fucking $1,000 phone and headphones on so you can't hear them coming up to rob you.
I covered me and Michael Daly were together covering the blackout in Bushwick. Where we did a front page story for the Village Voice. It was like insanity. Under the L with not even moonlight. I mean,
that was that the summer of the Wild? No, Wilding might have been a little after that, but
no, it was the summer of Sam. It was 1977. Yeah, it was Son of Sam and the blackout, and it was insane.
Bushwick was Bushwick.
Oh yeah, and you know my mom was at movie theater at the RKO Prospect in Park Slope, but she used to get extra work. She used to go to all the other RKOs when people were on vacation and do their shifts. And one of them was, she used to take the subway out to Bushwick in the old days on her own. I mean, you know, she was down to the RKO.
Was that the L train?
Oh yeah, my mom got everywhere by the subway. She knew it like the back of her hand. She was from Belfast, but you give her a token, she could get to, you know, Alaska.
There was a certain character that people had, and you know, people aren't made that way anymore. That's what I just don't believe. We'll never see a generation of people like that again.
And they were tough, yeah, and they were, you know, a lot of them were either immigrants or children of immigrants, and they never complained, and they just thought that, like, you know, the most important thing in life was work. You know, a good job defines you. You know, and they didn't want to hear complaints because a lot of them had lived through the Depression, which was just unbelievable. I mean, you know,
that's what I'm saying. I guess you come over here, you see a bunch of thugs, you're going, what do you think, you scare me?
Yeah, my mom came from Belfast. I mean, you know, from where and she
talk about Bushwick. We're talking about Belfast.
Was really exploited, and then she landed in New York on October 29th, 1929, the day the stock market crashed. That's how she got Black Tuesday. That was her introduction to America. So it was all fucking struggle, but I never ever heard her complain. She never complained.
I talk with people a lot of times about trauma, okay, and how now trauma is perceived and kind of so differently. Like this experience you're talking about, coming from Belfast to probably the worst day in American history.
Yeah.
Okay.
At that point, yeah.
And like, what are you going to go talk to a shrink in 1929 and talk about your personal feelings and trauma? I mean, you sucked it up and you moved on. But I get it. We learn and we evolve.
For the au-pair job, you know.
Unbelievable.
It's just another generation altogether. So. And, you know, Colin and I talked a lot about that. That's where, you know, they would always say, offer it up to the holy souls of purgatory. Just, you know, whenever you had a problem, offer it up or say a prayer to St. Anthony. It was like, that was it. They didn't, you know, you think you have problems. And then she still found, even with her scrounging to get all the bills paid and put food on the table, she would secretly send $1 to the missions in Africa or the Native American Indians, and without my own man knowing, you know, as she was always doing that. And then she got mugged, you know, a couple of times. It started her downfall. It started her Parkinson's disease, but she got mugged by two guys, and the two anti-crime cops were coming by on Prospect Park West, and they saw the mugging. And they chased the guys and they got them and they brought them back and they said to my mother, can you identify who did this to you? And she said, oh yeah. And they said, well, who was it? And she said, it was the British soldiers. She went back to her childhood in Belfast. The trauma.
She got hit?
She got hit. She thought she thought that she had gotten hit by the British soldiers back in Belfast. Then when she found out it was these kids, two black guys from, you know, Bedford-Stuyvesant, when they went away to jail, she used to mail them care packages. She would send them chewing gum, a prayer book, rosaries, and money for cigarettes, packs of Lucky Strikes, and and my old man would hit the fucking roof.
My God.
And then one guy started sending her letters and, you know, apologizing for what he did to her. And then, you know, he found religion and he was, I don't know, he might have been bullshit, hoping for an early parole. But she was that kind of a Christian that she forgave the people that mugged her.
But if you can really do that, what your mom did, I think that's the highest form of true spirituality.
Well, her thing was they had to have, they must have needed the money to do it. So they grew up
I need
with
money
poverty.
too. Yeah,
and
yeah.
She said, and I grew up with poverty. My mom was like a big, in our neighborhood in Brooklyn, working class Irish neighborhood. My mom thought that Martin Luther King was one of the greatest things that ever happened. You know,
he was.
But not many people in my neighborhood.
The neighborhood weren't singing his praises.
Yeah. But you know,
We ain't
and
marching
she
through
said,
my
"You don't
street."
understand. He's marching for civil rights, which I never had when I was a kid." She knew what bigotry
Yeah.
was. She didn't allow bigotry in the house
Wow.
because she suffered anti-Catholic bigotry in the streets of Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
They literally burned her school. The Protestants burned her school down. She used to have to go to school in an armored vehicle because it was pelted with rocks every day when they went to a new school. And her brother used to get beat up all the time on the way home from school, and the guys used to make him curse the Pope in Rome and spit on him, and they were called the Fenian bastards, and for being Catholics. So I mean, the Titanic was built in Belfast. Only 11 Catholics worked on the entire construction of the ship. She didn't forget that. So she translated that into the experience of African Americans in America. When she saw them, she saw Bull Connor in the South sicking German shepherds on the freedom riders. She sat down and wept in front of the television in front of all of us because that to her reminded her of the black and tans in Northern Ireland using dogs to go after Catholic protesters. So we grew up with a mother like that who, our liberalism grew out of actual experiences of bigotry. She passed on to us what had happened to her. And that was why she came to America, to get away from that. And when she saw it in America, it absolutely outraged her. So that's why she supported the civil rights movement, and couldn't wait to vote for David Dinkins as the first black mayor. she would have loved if she had lived long enough to go and vote for Barack Obama, just the way my mom was made,
Yeah.
And so she influenced all of us. She had a really good, kind heart, and said she believed in the underdog, and that filtered through all our 7 kids.
Being a writer, right? There's a certain sensitivity that comes, right? And I'm sure your mom played such a prolific role in that with all you guys, right?
Right.
Did you get a chance to have these in-depth conversations with her, so like that you really were engaged in as she was teaching you lessons like this, that you really...
Oh, absolutely. And better than that,
So
my
lucky.
sister Kathleen actually sat down and did like about 20 hours of interviews with her, all about her childhood experiences. And then we have it all. We did a self-published book of just dedicated to my mom that we all contributed to, and all those transcripts from my mom are in it, are in this book, and then all different stories that we told about it. And we Pete's daughter Deirdre did it, and Pete edited it. My sister Kathleen was involved with editing it too. And they, on what would have been my mom's 100th birthday, we all got together and had a big dinner in her honor, and
what an
celebrated
honor.
this
Wow.
book. So all her old stories about everything that influenced her life. And she talked about the pandemic back, that killed people. She was born in 1910, but there was one of her aunts who died in the Spanish flu. So, and we used to think, wow, that must have been amazing to live through a pandemic, and here we are.
Yeah, it's so. Again, I see so many differences. I've grown to learn this great thing about when you see differences, find similarities. And when you're telling the story about your mother, I met this woman recently, Tao. Her name is Tao. She was the oldest yoga teacher in the world, and I was just fascinated with a little bit of her story. I saw her on America's Got Talent. She was ballroom dancing at 97 years old. I'm thinking, wow. I found out she's in White Plains. I got to meet this lady. I go up, I introduced myself to her. She became like a mentor to me. I used to spend, I'd go once a week and sit down and bring her lunch and just have some sushi with her. And she marched with fucking Gandhi.
Wow.
When you talk about Dr. King, she marched with Dr. King in 68. She's a white French Indian woman marching at the civil rights marches here.
Right.
Who does that shit? She's a pioneer on so many levels. Her story was, she was hiding Jews in her aunt's house in France and inviting the Germans in to come on in, have some wine. They lived in a vineyard. Come on in. She poured them wine, get them hammered, and get them the fuck out. While she's got 30 Jews in a wine vat downstairs.
Yeah, right.
That's balls.
Yeah, and
that's
it's New York. And to have, you find people like that in New York, it's just that's so great about this city, and that's why it gets me nuts when people say, "Well, is the city ever coming back?" Give me a fucking break. Right. There's going to be a stampede to rent all that space in Midtown Manhattan as soon as the pandemic is over. People are coming.
Yeah. But it's still never the same. It's been already so. Colin does this great joke about whatever the L train or whatever. He goes, it's like a ski lift and Sweden.
In Aspen, yeah.
It's changed so much, but there's still that heart that
yeah.
The stoop,
and that'll come from the new immigrants, and the ones that have to. What makes New York work is struggle. And it's always the new immigrants that are struggling. And so, after we've been here, I'm first generation, but new arrivals, they really have to break their ass to make it work. And they still live in places in Queens like Jackson Heights and Corona and, the places
Maspeth.
Where life is tough. And those are the people, and look at what cab drivers go through today. I mean, how tough is it to drive a cab in New York? You can't even make $1.
Especially when your medallion that was worth $1 million a few years ago is worth nothing.
And these poor guys committing suicide and stuff over it, their whole life savings. So there's another whole part of New York that gets overlooked. And one of the sad parts of what's happened to the newspaper business is that you don't have columnists who find the people beneath the headlines who are the city of New York. Because, I guess for about 15 years, I only covered Brooklyn and Queens in a Brooklyn and Queens column. And that's where it was really shining the light on the blue sheets. And, and I wasn't writing off the hard news.
There's a term only a New Yorker gets anyway, the blue seats.
Yeah. And, but that's the city. That's the city. And that's where the bulk of our readers were Brooklyn and Queens. So they wanted me to write a column that gave voice to the people that from where I come from, so which I didn't even have to cross a bridge or a tunnel to go to work. I would, I live in Queens now and, I grew up in Brooklyn. So it was like an honor to do that, to cover those people, to put faces, into the newspaper and tell their stories that don't necessarily make the front page, but they are the story of New York. And that was the brilliance of Breslin too. I mean, Breslin came out of Queens, out of Richmond Hill, and he knew how to talk to common people, and then he also knew how to talk to power brokers, and he spoke truth to power directly. He would get and so that's what people liked. That you had a guy who had
that's a nice way of saying
mine or yours, who was in the newspaper, 3 times a week speaking for them. That's, even if you disagreed with his politics, you knew that he knew, what the real deal was about growing up, rubbing nickels together.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, Dennis, it's been an honor following you and reading your columns over the years and listening to your voice, and it still is, and I don't know where the next Denis Hamill is going to come from, but I just hope there's another crew coming up. I mean,
he's probably going to be, or she is going to probably be, Asian or Mexican or, and those are the voices that the new immigrants that are going to come. I'm the child of Irish immigrants, but there's going to be people who are going to give voice to the next generation of the city. And then, look, there's room in the city for everybody, so there should be voices in the local newspapers for that. The problem is you can't pay enough of them anymore. So the death of local news is really disturbing. Jim Dwyer, who was a really good buddy, He no longer had a column at the New York Times when he passed away about a month ago, because it wasn't the kind of thing that got clicks all over the world, because he was writing just about New Yorkers. He was still working for the Times, but he wasn't doing the column that he started out doing. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner, so the disappearance of that kind of native voice in the newspaper is sorely missed. Those are the stories that I'm afraid we're going. And if I always encouraged all my students at Brooklyn College, and most of them were people of color, and some of them really talented kids. Go out and find these stories and find a place to work, and whether it's a little local paper or a website, wherever your voice can be heard, bring it to life for people, and by telling stories and telling them well. Use nouns and verbs, and I encouraged them to read the collections that Pete and Breslin wrote about how to do this well. How to actually write a column, but then use your own life experiences to bring those stories to life in the inner city, and there will be a place to find those voices if people tell those stories. There will be.
I tell you,
I think
Dennis,
that those people are going to emerge. I just don't believe that we're going to all be happy to just to watch 24-hour cable news. I mean,
oh my God,
it became a circus in the last 4 years because of Trump. But I can't wait to not having to listen to my president 24 hours a day. I want to get back to watching the news once at night, not day long. And then and watch more local news, because that's the stuff that affects our lives here in New York.
I'll tell you something. There's a lot of great baseball players, right, that have come on through the course of the beginning of baseball, right? But there's those Babe Ruths and those Mickey Mantles and those Ted Williams and those Willie Mays that stand the test of time. And it's just the talent with the drive, with the work ethic, and having all the ingredients come together at the right time and be in the right scenario. The alchemy is just there. And I put you in that category. There's a select few that just your authenticity and your way to articulate it. I mean, your experience. I mean, you could be as articulate as you are and be as authentic as you are. But if you didn't have your experience, all the stories are different. So it's just the alchemy of you doing what you do the way you do it. There's not going to be, there'll be some guy that might hit more home runs, but it's a whole different fucking ball game.
Yeah, it's not the same when it's Alex Rodriguez, is it? I mean,
Alex Rodriguez is no fucking Hank Aaron, man.
No, because he didn't put in the work and he cheated. And
there's so much. I remember meeting Hank Aaron as a kid, and it to me, I put him in the same level as a Barack Obama. This was such a thrill. It's still a highlight of my life.
And what people don't remember is that he never had like big 60 home run seasons.
He never had a 50 home run season.
But he was always healthy. And he hit 35,
every single
40,
year.
40,
every
40,
year.
40. And he had a long career and he stayed healthy and he put the work in all the time. He was the hardest.
And he was class personified.
Oh, tremendous baseball player.
And don't forget what he came up against too. When Willie Mays came up, what they had to be subjected to. You hear about Jackie Robinson? They were 2 years behind Jackie Robinson.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And but for somebody like Barry Bonds to take the title away from a Hank Aaron with juice, pisses me off. I have to say, it pisses me off.
Yeah, no, it's a whole different thing. But listen, I don't want to hijack you. I could do this weekly with you. I mean, because you got that's the reverence I have for you. I'd love to do it again. But I just really want to express my gratitude for you taking the time to do this. And it's a thrill for me. It's an honor for me. So I want you to know that.
It's been fun. It's been fun for me. And I hope everybody watches Law and Order. We're in our 22nd year. So we're having fun with that.
I have
It's
a
a
couple of
natural
friends.
transition for me to go from newspapers into. I'm recycling some of the stories I covered in the news into fictional stories, and
Let
I
me
think
just ask you one last question before I go, because I meant to ask you this earlier and I didn't. But of all the stories that you've done, is there one story that you kind of reported that was like a high profile story that you would say is synonymous with you and your career?
there was two. I guess covering 9/11. I was down there the day after the attacks. And I got a cop took me in with a police NYP jacket on, got me past through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and that was the most amazing New York story I covered. But the most heartbreaking story I ever covered, and I thought I'd seen it all and been jaded enough, was Newtown, Sandy Hook, 2 weeks before Christmas when those kids were all slaughtered in the school. I was there. I covered it every day for like 2 weeks up through Christmas, and every day I came home and hugged my kid. I just couldn't wait to get home. I refused to stay in the town. It was too sad. And I would drive back home to Queens and grab my kid, put my arm around him, and put on the basketball game, just to try to shake it out of me. But it was really hard. That was the toughest assignment. Because it was all children and they were targeted. 9/11 was a different kind of story. There were certainly way more people died, and it was ferocious, and it was an attack. It was an act of war, and it was on my city that I loved, and I knew people that died, and but it was a different. Each one of them affected me in a different way. But those two of all the stories. And I guess the pandemic, I was still writing for a little paper in Long Island, writing about this, what this all meant. And it was this pandemic, which took my brother from me. My brother John is another one that'll last forever. I covered, a lot of big stories in my time, big trials, big events, and plane crashes, and all kind of, murders and serial killers and all kinds of crazy stuff. But I guess those three stories, the Sandy Hook, 9/11, and the pandemic, are the three that will stand out for me as ones that were enormous, will never go away, and yet affected me on a personal level. Because a lot of times you cover stories and you want to, the way a cop, you want to leave them in the station house. You want to leave things in the newsroom. These were three stories that you took home. You took home because you're part of it. You just will be there forever.
Yeah. Again, Dennis, I know this has been a tough year for you, and with your losses in your family.
Yeah, it's been a tough year for me, but it's not. People say that to me a lot, but you know what? Everybody's had a tough year. Everybody. And it's been a fucking horror with this virus and so much terrible stuff that happened that there's no time for self-pity, believe me. And I learned that from my parents. Self-pity gets you nowhere. Move on. I'm looking forward to 2021. We have a new president, and I'm going to try to put this one in the rearview mirror. But we still have a couple of weeks to go with this fucking miserable year. So who knows?
A lot of time for some crazy shit to go down.
We're both still here. I'll see you next year. Do this again.
Yes. Listen, my best to you and your family. Have a great,
Merry Christmas, man.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and all of that.
Keep the faith.
All right. Thanks, Dennis.
All right. Bye-bye.